So thanks again for joining us, and thank you, Dr. White, for joining us and agreeing to this. So we're going to start with some of these questions. This is...
Are they really questions, or are they...
I'm sneaking my own in here.
Okay. You able to hear? Am I? Hear me? Okay, good.
All right, so...
That does look difficult to read.
It is.
Evidently, the public educational system is... remember cursive? How many of you can still write cursive?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We're actually teaching our young one
There you go.
to write in cursive, but he's left-handed.
Oh, that makes it really weird, yeah.
So, first question. Okay, so this would be in regards to transgenderism. What about hermaphrodites?
Okay.
Male or female, how do we rebut this? How do we refute this debate, rebuttal? I'm trying.
Yeah.
I'm trying.
Well, let's remember something. The very, very small percentage of actual individuals that are afflicted with a genetic condition, and there are numerous kinds of conditions that are related to the sex chromosomes, XXY, XYY, situations like that. Not only is that extremely small, but that's not what we're talking about here. Transgenderism is not a genetic reality regarding, no one's saying, well, at least not yet, I'm sure they will eventually, saying that there used to be the whole thing about the gay gene. You notice that's sort of gone away.
Right.
It's gone away because if there is a quote unquote gay gene, then you could get rid of all homosexuals with a genetic therapy. And they don't even want you going there, so they've sort of abandoned that one. But individuals who have that kind of a condition should be sensitively treated by the church, pastorally counseled as to what kind of external demonstration of their chosen gender, because they may have sexual characteristics of both. They may not ever be able to be married, things like that. That's a pastoral issue that the church needs to be dealing with, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking here about people who have perfectly normal XX, XY chromosomes and perfectly normal functioning physical bodies being told that they can rebel against the way God has created them if they choose to do so. And, at least in the past, cross-dressing and things like that didn't involve surgeries and didn't involve the mutilation of the body. Today, detransitioners, there's a term that whoever, I don't even think I could explain to my parents now that they're both gone, let alone my grandparents, why we need words like detransitioner, but we do. And their stories are ignored by almost everybody. The media, they don't want to admit that there are so many who utterly regret what they did and are clearly saying, I was misled, I was lied to, and now I will never have children. And as a woman, I no longer have a female form. I'll never nurse a child. I'll never have children. And vast majority of them who do all the surgeries will never have a normal sex life or anything like that as well. They've been completely mutilated. And that's what it is. It's mutilation. If it was working and you cut it off, that's mutilation.
Right.
Because there are other forms of this type of mental disease. There are people who are absolutely convinced that they're not supposed to have a left arm.
Right. Those are the...
I don't remember the specific name of the condition, but they become
amputated just so that they can
become. They become convinced that I may be able to move that, I may be able to feel that, but that's not me.
Right.
And I'll never be happy as long as I have it. And so they want to be able to have their arm amputated or a leg amputated. to be more who I am supposed to be. And up until our generation, we all recognized that that was a mental disease. There was something very wrong there. Now, when we talk about this situation with sexuality, so much of it is not just some type of mental thing. It is succumbing to social pressures that you will be happier. Young ladies go through tremendous difficulties at certain times in their life as teenagers. Mm-hmm. And you'd be much happier if you were a guy, because guys don't have these problems.
I think of tomboys.
Yeah, right, exactly, yeah. And if we don't have, if our society hasn't started off with, you were made by your Creator and gifted by your Creator, and your real challenge in life is to obey His law and to find your fulfillment in who He has made you to be. Instead, since there's no Creator, you get to determine. At the very point in your life when you don't have a clue what you're doing.
Right.
You really don't. I mean, come on. I got married at 19, she was 18. And there are a lot of people that, it's just way, way, way too young. Well, in the history of man, that wasn't way, way, way too young at all. But still, I recognize that in those first years of marriage, we were still doing a lot of growing. Not just together, but as, because we were
human
kids.
Beings.
Yeah, as human beings. We were kids. And I think it's wonderful that we got to do that last bit of growing up together. Mm-hmm. I think that's a special thing. I'm seeing all the couples hitting each other and stuff like that. Isn't that sweet? Anyway.
Yeah, I think that going back to this here, I appreciate the answer, but hermaphrodites and male, those are so rare. That is, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's like a fraction of a percent.
It's much less than 1%. Yeah. And like I said, those are real conditions, but that's not what we're talking about when we talk about transgenderism at all. Yeah. It's they will sometimes use that to try to sort of put Christians or others off who haven't really thought that through. But like I said, I was Department Fellow Anatomy and Physiology in college. Weird double major. I mean, I'd literally go from demonstrating our cadavers to high school students. We had cadavers at Grand Canyon University. So I was the guy, I'm sitting there, Willie and Clara were their names in life, male and female, and I could show, Willie, by the way, was a smoker his entire life. Anywhere you cut in his lungs was black as pitch. Mm. I could show you the spot on his heart that killed him. Wow. And I'd go running from demonstrating cadavers to Greek class. In fact, once I forgot to take off my smock, and Dr. Baird and all my other students were moving their chairs away from me. And Dr. Baird's like, Brother White, if you'd like to go back to the biology department and deposit your odoriferous garment there, that would be wonderful for all of us. And so, yeah. So I was a weird double major, but I did a lot of study of genetics, and we understand exactly what causes those various conditions. And that's not what transgenderism is at all.
It's not reality.
Right.
You're supposed to pretend and play their game. And I'm going to let you answer this. How do we love gays but also honor God?
Well, we recognize that everyone's made in the image of God. And when you look at Romans chapter 1, unlike what some people say, when Romans chapter 1, verses 26 and 27 lays out both lesbianism and male homosexuality, and Romans 1:26 may be the only place in the Bible that specifically refers to lesbianism, but it clearly does. There's no question about it. We need to recognize that Paul is using that as an illustration of what the exchange involves, because he uses the term, they exchanged the truth of God for the lie. And so some people have said that, what was the guy who ended up being president of the Southern Baptist Convention for extra time because of COVID? J.D. Greear. J.D. Greear was the one who had this lady in his church named Jen Wilkin, I think, that said that...
I think she's at Matt Chandler's.
Now, probably, but
Okay.
maybe just quote her. I don't know. But anyways, she said that God whispers about sexual sin.
I remember that.
Remember that? Okay. And he preached on Romans chapter 1. He basically said, hey, Romans chapter 1 just presents homosexuality along with all these other sins. It's just one sin amongst many sins, including disobedience to parents and gluttony and greed and so on and so forth. That's just not the case. It is used as an example of how deeply man is impacted by idolatry, that is, by a rejection of the truth of God, a suppression of the knowledge of God, and worshiping the creature rather than the creator, who's blessed forever. And so it is an illustration that that rebellion can get all the way down to, in fact, I can't prove this even from the original language, but when Paul says, for even their females, and he uses technical terms for female and male in Romans 1, not just the generic terms, but technical terms. When he says, for even their females exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. I think when he dictated that, because he dictated Romans, he tells who wrote it down, I think he probably said, for even their females. Because the mothering nurture, the desire to be a mom and to give life is so powerful. To throw that off in idolatry, in rebellion against God's purpose, is an amazing thing. Mm-hmm. It's one thing for men to do it. Men are walking beakers of testosterone, and the fact of the matter is they engage in profligate sex rather regularly, but women are looking for relationship and stability and family and things, and even they will engage in that. So the point of Paul there is not this is just one sin amongst many sins. The point is this is a sin that demonstrates that sin goes all the way to our own self-identity and can warp that and change that. So you're either in relationship with the one true God and you're living in light of how he has created you to be, or you can be twisted all the way down to that particular level. So how can you love someone in that situation? Well, the only way to love someone in that situation is to honestly tell them about what Scripture says. I'd give as a resource female professor who was thank you Rosaria's book on the subject, and how a pastor and his wife over time were able to break through. I mean, she was a lesbian professor,
English,
and all this stuff, and so there's a good example. I mean, it takes time. You have to really feel a calling. But I will also admit that there is a giving over, and that there is a...
It says that right in Romans.
That gave them
right
over.
there.
And that does, remember, 1 Corinthians chapter 6 says, such were some of you,
right.
but you were watched. So all this stuff about saying, well, you can't get saved, blah, blah, that's ridiculous. But there can be a giving over to where there is just zero desire to hear anything, zero ears to hear. But that's the case with any type of sin, if you're given over to it. I hope Rosaria doesn't hear the recording of this, that I struggle with lots of names anymore. What's your name again? That type of thing.
Bob. Yeah. Thank you. So we see the liberal side infiltrating and manipulating our governing bodies. In addition to prayer, how can we overcome this influence of evil?
Well, I've gone to no longer using the term liberal because they're not liberal.
That's true.
Liberal is someone who's talking about freedom.
Right.
And these people are totalitarians. They're leftists. And they have a particular worldview, the secular worldview. And I have been saying for years now that secularism in its essence is the negation of everything that is true in the Christian message. And so I believe that it is one of the enemies that must be put under Jesus' feet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what 1 Corinthians, every enemy must be put under his feet. The last enemy put under his feet is death. So Christ will defeat secularism. It may take centuries and millions of lives, but it will be, because it cannot maintain a society outside of the use of force. Mm-hmm. Because you're living in God's world and you are pretending that it's not God's world, and you're rejecting the foundational elements of what it means to live in God's world, and so therefore it will collapse. But it's still, the Soviet Union lasted for 70 years and didn't really die.
Right.
Because when you think about something, if a governmental system collapses just because it can't provide economic success for its people, but the foundational ideas stay alive, let's just be honest. The communists didn't fail; they just moved to New York.
Mm-hmm. And Chicago.
Chicago, LA.
Yeah,
they're in all of our universities.
Yes, they are.
They and everybody goes, well, that already failed. Yeah, well, we'll make it fail again, and that's what we're facing. So we have to. Now, this raises some pretty controversial subjects right now, because this Christian nationalist movement and the white boy summer stuff and all this other stuff that's going on, and it's in Reformed churches, it's in evangelical churches, it's in Baptist churches, it's everywhere. It's in Roman Catholicism. It's called integralism when it's manifested within Roman Catholicism. There are many people who are fundamentally saying we need a Christian Franco. We need a strong military totalitarian leader who is a Christian. And I'm seeing people right now who are literally saying, hey, you know what? It's so bad, I wouldn't care if he was a Catholic. I wouldn't care if we had a Catholic sacral system. In other words, like we had before the Reformation.
Right.
We need something like that. And I'm just like, okay, all right. We do have to have a discussion as to what has been given to the church. What are the weapons of our warfare? And as I understand it, weapons of our warfare are the testimony of the gospel and prayer. And that's not enough for most people, because if you were called to minister faithfully in the years before Elijah's ministry, you wouldn't have had a whole lot of success, right? And people want success now. And yet there were 7,000 who hadn't bowed the knee to Baal. We don't know their names, don't know their zip codes, nothing. But they had remained faithful. And sometimes, if you are called to minister in a culture at the beginning of its downfall or judgment, that's not going to be a whole lot of fun.
Yeah.
That's not going to be a walk in the park. But you don't get to change what the gospel message is or what the purpose of the church is to fit your particular circumstances. It just doesn't work that way. But there are some people that are trying that, and they're coming up with desperate solutions that, in the end, do not trust that the gospel, in God's timing, can change any society, and that the kingdom of Christ will conquer, and Christ's enemies will be put under his feet. So, and a lot of this has to do with your personal eschatology, your church's eschatology. It does impact. I was raised with a particular eschatology that would not have had any understanding of why I would go to the Phoenix City Council and warn them that you're just as guilty as the people who lived in Weimar and allowed that camp up there to murder hundreds of thousands of people. Mm-hmm. The way I was raised, we were on a sinking ship and we were just looking forward to getting out of here. So you don't go to the city council and warn them about the judgment to come. Now, if they happen to wander into a church, then you can tell them on a personal level that they need to repent of their sins and trust Jesus. But the idea that as a magistrate, that they have a responsibility before God, never crossed our mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, your eschatology does end up impacting where you're going to go there. And I wish we could discuss eschatology without drawing knives, swords, guns,
Wouldn't that be nice?
explosive devices, things like that. But in my experience, there are certain topics in the church that we don't have the maturity to discuss yet. And that's one of them, sadly.
Yeah. How do I convince people, even family members, that because I stand by God's word and do not agree with some people's ethics and lifestyles, and I proclaim that I don't hate these people?
Right. Yeah, it's similar to the last one in the sense that our society has come up with new definitions of love and hate.
Right.
Love and hate now.
Love has lost.
Well, can you believe that one of the
What does that
biggest,
mean?
Can you believe that one of the most popular statements in our society right now is love is love? Wow, there's a brilliant statement if there ever
that's
was one.
nonsense.
I mean,
And
love is
what does
love.
that mean?
No one
It means
cares.
nothing.
No, see the difference between us and many of our loved ones is that you said, what does that mean? And for them, it's what does that feel like?
That's true. It's feeling.
It's
about
all
emotions.
about how you feel. And, again, talking to the older ones amongst us, that's not how we were raised, but I'm surprised at how many of my compatriots in my generation have given into this, have embraced it. That's not how we were raised. The society didn't function on this emotional, squishy, ishy-gishy stuff, but now we do. And so we have to be able to explain that love and hate have to have an objective standard to be meaningful words. If you're going to say you love someone, there has to be some way you can define that. And that as a Christian, our greatest example of God's love is self-sacrificial giving in the cross. We are called to love one another and serve one another. And that emotion, and I think this is why as I pointed out, when my daughter would tell people at school that her parents had been married for 20 years, or at Starbucks a few years later they'd been married for 25 years, they didn't believe. Why? Because we have redefined love in such a fashion that it's an emotion that you experience intensely for a certain period of time, and when it goes away,
That's it.
that's it. You just go find another source of that emotion. The idea of a covenantal, lifelong commitment just isn't a part of our society's thinking any longer. And so, love that remains love in the midst of sickness and poverty, and I always think back on the example of one of the great Princeton theologians. A lot of people don't know this, but B.B. Warfield, who I thought, obviously there are things I disagree with Warfield on, but his stuff on the Trinity was some of the best stuff I ever read. His stuff on the canon anticipated my own conclusions on that. Extremely useful. His stuff on inspiration, super duper useful. But his collected works are about yay big. It's not huge. And the reason for that was, and there's some question about this, but his wife was an invalid. Some of the stories said she was struck by lightning. And he would not travel. He had to stay close, and he couldn't do the traveling and do a lot of the speaking that would have made him much more famous, much more wealthy, much more successful as a scholar and stuff like that, because he was committed to his marriage vows.
Yeah.
He'd made a vow before God to love and honor and cherish this woman, and just because she was struck down and lost her health didn't change the vows that he had made. Well, in our society, of course it does.
Right.
Because it's not fulfilling me anymore, that type of thing. So it's
Viewed as
hard.
transactional.
Yeah.
Like she's not doing anything for me.
Right, exactly. So it's hard to explain if our loved ones, our family members, our neighbors have bought this secularized definition of love and hate. That's what you have to address.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way that you can explain Christian commitment to someone who thinks that love is just simply a very strong emotion.
Right.
Because a very strong emotion didn't take Jesus to the cross.
Very true. I think this one can piggyback on that last, but Philippians 2:4 says, esteem others better than yourselves. How does House Bill 2513-12 esteem any others as better?
Well, I would first want to point out that Philippians chapter 2
It's about the church.
is specifically addressed to peace in the church, and that this is meant to be amongst Christians. And the only way that you can look out for the affairs of others more than for yourself is the Spirit of God grants to you that humility of mind, because the next verse begins the Carmen Christi. And you want an example of humility of mind? Here it is in Jesus.
Christ. Yep.
He considered others more important than himself, and that's the whole Carmen Christi, that him to Christ is to God. So that's meant directed to Christians, and obviously there would have been a day long ago in our society where even governmental bills would have been considered in the context of a biblical context. That has passed long ago. I suppose there are some southern states where there might be still a concern about some of those things, but certainly, I don't know what's happened to y'all here, but y'all used to be conservatives, and it only took about 10 years for you all to go from deep red to bright blue, but it's mainly Boulder's influence. But anyway, it's happening in Arizona as well, sadly. It's happening all over the place. But you can't consider others more important than yourself in a secular context.
Right.
You can't. There's no foundation for doing it. I suppose a secularist might say, well, if you gain joy from that, and as soon as you don't gain joy from that, you're going to stop doing that. Mm-hmm. From the Christian perspective, the reason you consider others more important than yourself, the Greek term is tapainos aphrune, and it's humility of mind, and it is having certain rights and laying them aside in the service of others. So Jesus has certain rights as God, and he lays them aside and it's made in the form of a servant, and so on and so forth. That's the illustration, that's the sermon illustration that is given to us in verses 5 through 11. And until you recognize you've died with Christ and now you live to God, you don't have a basis for doing that. The Buddhist monk might do that, but he's doing that for his own self-promotion.
Right.
It's not, I've died to this life, and therefore this is how I serve my Lord.
I want to stop the cycle of reincarnation and reach
Well,
nirvana.
then you got that too, yeah.
Well, how do we go forward in grace and justice? I'm sorry. I cannot read this.
Egyptian hieroglyphics. Okay.
Yes.
Well, here.
Here, you. There you go.
How do we go forward in grace? Justice deferred is justice denied. Martin Luther King. Knowing God's will, how do we Christians go forward? This isn't actually that bad. Where God specifically wants
It's my glasses.
the wheat of
new ones.
the wheat and tares to live together until Jesus' return. It's written in cursive, so maybe no, it's not. It's not even in cursive. It's an interesting printing type stuff. And some of it's cursive, some of it's.
Just pick on me. That's fine.
Okay,
That's fine. Go ahead.
Hey, I'm in your church.
If it makes you feel better.
The thing I like about this is you can take shots at the pastor because you're not going to be here next Sunday. I'm not. You will.
Oh yeah.
You got to live with it. You got to live with it. I'm going to be at Apologia Church next Sunday, Lord willing. How do we go forward in grace? Justice deferred is justice denied. Well, you've got to be careful about that. I mean, okay, it says Martin Luther King. All right, but there have been many, many times in church history where the people of God had to recognize that justice deferred was how God was bringing judgment upon a nation, and that justice would be done. This is one of the biggest dangers. And interestingly enough, you know who's written a lot about this? Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell, one of the things that he talks about is the great danger that we have today of confusing temporal justice with cosmic justice. And what he's saying is, in the past, we recognized that we were not going to be able to have perfect justice in this life, that people were going to get away with things. And when you look at God's law, when you look at the standard of God's law for evidence against someone, it's very high. Eyewitness testimony, 2 or 3 witnesses. And I think this is really important right now because with AI, you can't believe almost anything you see online anymore.
That's true.
I mean, if you've seen what Google is putting out right now is these videos, can you tell that that's created by AI? I can't. And I remember the first time a couple years ago, somebody produced a little video they took a clip from the Dividing Line, but they created an AI version of my voice. It was the first time I'd ever heard an AI version of my voice. And I recognized that what I was saying, I didn't remember, and it wasn't matching up with my lips moving, but it sure sounded like it. And that's when I really first started realizing, wow, it's not going to be long until they can create a video of you saying or doing anything. And just to use it as an illustration, and I'll get back to this, but I debated a guy last summer in Colorado Springs. And he's a young Roman Catholic guy. And Alex Dorado is his name. Well, a couple weeks ago, somebody contacted me, and in fact, Rich just had me listen to a voicemail that I'm going to have to respond to, if he can send it to me somehow. Is there some way you can send that to me? Try. Once you get back to where we got your cell coverage here is
it's bad.
Very bad.
Yeah, it's very bad.
But from a Catholic news agency wanting to interview me because I debated him, because he's been accused of grooming young girls and sexting and all this stuff. And I've seen the stuff that's been posted, and it's screenshots. Do you know how easy it is to create a screenshot? I mean, you could do that with photo magic or whatever, Photoshop, years ago. Now with AI, it's simple. And so I addressed this subject on the Dividing Line a couple days ago. I said, it's real simple. Alex needs to come out and say yes or no. And if he comes out and says this stuff is fake, then we as Christians cannot accept electronic evidence if we cannot verify that it's accurate. And look, the fact of the matter is most of us do not have the capacity to make that determination.
Right.
And God's law says it is worse for an innocent man to be condemned than for a guilty man to go free. Why? Because there's a day of judgment coming. And see, secularism can't have that. There is no day of judgment in secularism. And that's why they have to have cosmic justice now. And that's why with the Kavanaugh Supreme Court justice stuff, you can go 35 years back, long past. We used to have something called a statute of limitations. You could only bring charges for a certain period of time. Why was that? Well, because people's memories fail and evidence can be tampered with, and because we as a society recognized God would judge in the end. We don't have a God who will judge in the end anymore. So we are getting rid of statutes of limitation and all the rest of that kind of stuff, throwing it out the door. And during the Kavanaugh stuff, I heard people saying, it's better for innocent people to get trapped than to have any victims not get justice. But what they mean by that is in this life, because we cannot trust there will be justice in the future.
Right.
So the back of my RV, it's actually the ministry's RV, but the back of the RV, when I plug in, there's a big LCD screen I have put back there, and it scrolls Acts 17:31 all the time. And it's saying that God has appointed a
Appointed a
day
day.
when he is going to judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And he's given evidence to all by raising him from the dead. And the giving evidence to all is not who he is. The giving evidence is there is a day of judgment coming.
Mm-hmm.
And the resurrection is given as evidence that the judge has been raised from the dead and he will judge in righteousness. That's what's missing now. That's what's completely missing. And so I said, while I was talking about the Alex Dorado thing, Rich texted me, and some of our guys that were listening said, hey, Alex has talked about this. Here's the link. And so I brought it up. And he says, this is fake. I'm like, okay. I said, all right, this is a Roman Catholic, a guy that had actually said some untrue things about our debate. But I said, if someone says this is not true, then we have to wait until we can determine the truthfulness of these issues. And the fact of the matter is, we may not be able to do that in this life.
Right.
But if we're going to be consistent, we have to have these very, very high standards, but they require you believing that there will be a day of judgment. So that's the justice denied part. There will be no justice denied because the day of judgment will come and justice will be done. That's the Christian position, but that's not the secular position.
Right.
Yeah.
Would you agree that lack of teaching of the sovereignty of God in the American church has contributed to the idea of subjective truth? Man's freedom is more important than God.
Well, definitely. We have, in evangelicalism broadly, and even among some churches that would self-identify as Reformed, there is such a capitulation to the centrality of man's emotional feelings that, well, Steve Camp used to use the illustration that we've been afflicted with Jesus is my boyfriend or girlfriend songs.
Oh, gosh.
And it's true.
It is.
It really, you listen to a lot of, I'm not saying all contemporary Christian music is garbage. It's not. I have friends in the contemporary Christian music industry.
They're not singing lovey-dovey Jesus songs.
No. If you've ever listened to Skillet, they're not singing lovey-dovey Jesus songs. But the reality is that the fear of the Lord that is so much a part of the biblical revelation is not how you're going to grow your church and meet your budget and everything else. And so it's much better to present the idea of God as your servant meeting your needs than you as God's creature who will be judged on the basis of the strict judgment of his law, seeking his grace and recognizing that the only peace you can ever have with God is in the imputed righteousness of Jesus Christ. So, yeah, if you don't have a sovereign God, then you don't really have much argument against mankind pretending to be sovereign himself. Because that's what transgenderism is. It's me saying, I am sovereign over my own reality. I can look at my own body. I know what my own body screams to me. And I can look at the organs of my body and see how they specifically are supposed to function. And I know all of these things. But I can still say, no, this isn't right. And I will utilize modern science and people who are literally willing to be paid to mutilate human bodies. Oh my goodness, I cannot imagine the responsibility that will be laid upon people who did that. People who get themselves rich out of destroying people's bodies. Again, some Christians don't think that's ever going to be judged. I do. I think God's going to go, so, nice yacht you had there. How did you get the money for that? I chopped healthy organs off of little boys and girls. Yeah, that's not going to be judged. Yes, it is. You better believe it is. And these people need to be told. I think one of the reasons they get away with it is that there are very few Christians that are willing to say, you will be judged for that. Oh, you stinking fundamentalist. No, there is a day coming. Jesus said, if every thoughtless word that you speak or we should, I think it's okay if we expand that, type with your fingers or anything else. If every thoughtless word you type is going to be called into judgment, do you really think your motives for having engaged in that kind of activity and used the skills God gave you as a physician to mutilate human bodies in rebellion against his truth, you don't think that's going to be brought up for judgment? You think he's going to pass that over? Yeah, it's a monetary thing. We don't have to worry about that. No, come on. Get real.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. So yes, if you don't have a sovereign God who can be the ground and source of being able to say, this is what men are, this is what women are, these are your responsibilities, these are your responsibilities, this is the gifts given to you, the gifts, rejoice in these things because these are gifts of grace, so on and so forth. If you don't have that, then yeah, we're the ones that end up getting to define our own reality, and we'll always mess it up in the process.
Mm-hmm. Practical advice. Feet on the ground advice for remaining faithful to speak the truth with love and compassion.
Well, I hope I've given some of that, but, every day I have to be really careful, because if you start off first thing in the morning with exposure to all of this stuff, until you've been exposed to God's truth and time with him, it can really rob you of your peace and put you in a state of mind that's not good for the rest of your day in serving Christ. So there's really practical stuff, just simply Christian living. We need to recognize that given the level, the depth of depravity of the society in which we live, and sometimes we're unwilling to admit that, but man, we better. When I read the description of Sodom and Gomorrah, June, okay, not so much. Okay, I was thankful this year. June was a little better, there was a little bit of a drawback. But when I asked myself the question, was that a drawback because the society as a whole is moving in the right direction toward God's truth? Or is this simply a political reality and a monetary reality that certain companies recognize that right now that's not going to give them as much money as it would otherwise? That's what I think it is. And so it doesn't make me go, oh, look, revival taking place. I don't see evidence of that. Yeah. But what can we do? I mean, a lot of us feel just helpless. I mean, we raised our voices. I raised my voice against stuff in Arizona, against Phoenix. You did so here in Colorado, and they don't care. They just shove it through anyways because they are very dedicated to their gods. Mm-hmm. And you need to understand that they are very dedicated to their gods. And it's like, well, what do I do now? Well, you don't stop doing what you were doing. You identify that which is evil as evil. You don't become obsessed to the point where I'll never be happy living in Colorado again. Mm. I'll never have a good day living because I know the evil. Okay, yeah, you have to realize that that's where you live and that's what the situation is. But it seems to me there's good truth in the people who are saying, when you love your wife and take care of your kids, or if you're take care of your grandkids, or and you do so regularly, and you follow the commands of Christ, and you show up to church, and you sing the hymns, and you support the pastor, doesn't matter what anybody says, you can work and work and work to put a sermon together. And if half of your people aren't there, you're not Superman, and they're not there, and you're impacted by it. And so you do have a ministry to your local church and to your pastor and to your elders to be there and to support them, not just financially, but in prayer and personally and being there on Sunday morning. We are advancing Christ's kingdom by doing the little things of obedience day in and day out. And God can use that. God uses that faithfulness, that consistency to raise up another generation that will make the sacrifices to do what needs to be done then. And again, I don't know how many generations it might take for change to take place. God hasn't asked me to figure that type of stuff out.
Thankfully.
Thankfully, yeah. But and this doesn't sell. That's why this radical stuff and becoming a crusader and jumping off cliffs with an axe in your hand and all the rest of this kind of stuff, that sells, but it doesn't actually advance the kingdom.
Right.
We show that we don't really trust the Spirit and we don't really trust the Word when we start running off to other stuff to satisfy our "I want something now" attitude. That's just not how the saints of old have done it. And there was an old song. It's an old song. It came out when I was in my 20s. I guess it's not really an old song. But Steve Green has a song, "Find Us Faithful." And I was thinking about with John MacArthur's passing. And I did know him. We were sitting around dinner last night, and I was telling John MacArthur stories. I have some really good John MacArthur stories.
Got some more?
Well, I've got more. Oh, yes, I do have a couple more. Yeah, you heard some of them. But with his passing, I don't know if you know the song, but it's talking about may those who come behind us find us faithful, and it's talking about may we by our example show them the path and lead them in the way. And a lot of us don't have that kind of an idea that that's where we are, and that by living daily in obedience to Christ, that we are part of his purpose in showing the way for the next generation after them. We rarely think about what the generations after us are going to think about us. And I'll have to admit, right now, the youngest generation seems to really have absolutely no respect whatsoever for anybody who came before them, which is not a good thing. And I'm not saying all of them, but there is a real open expression of detestation by a lot of young men right now who just have no patience and don't see that someday they're going to be where we are now. And by the standard by which you judge, you yourself will be judged. Someone said that. I forget who that was. Anyway, sorry.
I think it was Jesus.
Oh, was it? Okay, all right. I couldn't remember if it was that or
That's
Abraham
always
Lincoln.
the right answer. As Christians, and I think this was addressed earlier, but as Christians, how are we to treat and feel about homosexuals and lesbians as Jesus would?
Isn't it interesting? I asked, I don't know if any of you saw the knockdown, drag-out fight that Jeff and I had with Brandon Robertson.
Oh, gosh.
About a year and a half, 2 years ago.
He's a progressive.
Well, he's a homosexual. He started off as an evangelical. And I've told the story many times. I was listening to him speak. He was barely 20, I think, when he was speaking about his orthodoxy and stuff like that. And he made a comment about Scripture. And I remember thinking about it. I was on a bike ride out in the middle of nowhere. I remember where I was, too. And I said to myself, this guy will never remain Orthodox. No way. And he's now the most wild-eyed, Jesus was a racist, whacked out leftist liberal on the planet. And so we did a Apologia Radio episode where he and I and Jeff went at it. And, there you get, there's someone, he is so intent upon perverting the biblical testimony, not only of homosexuality, but who Jesus is, that, this is a heretic. This is a wolf in sheep's clothing, though he's shedding the sheep's clothing, that's for sure. And so you really, what was the end of the question? Oh, you already got rid of it.
I've got it.
There was something toward the end of the question.
As
Jesus
would.
Okay, I knew there was a tagline in there that I was missing.
As Jesus would.
And one of the questions I asked him that it really stumped him, was he's trying to say, well, you know what? There's always been homosexuals, transgender people, things like that. And I said to him, then why didn't Jesus ever talk about you? I said, were there homosexuals who wanted to be married in Jesus' audience in his day? And if there were, and he knew it, and he never said anything to free them from the tyranny of the scribes and Pharisees and their misinterpretation of Moses' law, how can you respect him? You say we should do that today, but he didn't have to do it then? Man, it was just like, don't ask me these questions. I don't even want to answer that question. Because that's what they try to say, is they'll say, oh, this is natural, we've always been around. And I'm like, okay, then that means Jesus knew that there was a certain percentage of people in his audience that should be able to get married to a male to male, a female to female. And he never said a word about setting you free from the persecution that you have been facing all along. How can you call him the brave son of God? Well, the reason is the law of Leviticus 18 and 20 came from him. Mm-hmm. He was the sinless Son of God, the incarnate Son of God. That was his law, and it was good and it was just. And you're misrepresenting him now to try to say that he would have done this, that, or the other thing. So, yeah, that was...
He did say something in Matthew 19.
Yeah, he did. And the Creator, and he also said that anyone who teaches anyone to break the least commandment will be least in the kingdom of heaven, too. So he said a lot of stuff about that. Mm-hmm. And there's no way you can look at Jesus' understanding of the Old Testament scriptures and come up with the progressivist interpretation. So as Jesus would have spoken the truth and called for repentance and said, no one has ever called upon Jesus in true repentance that did not find him to be a perfect Savior. Nobody. Because I would say no one's ever called upon him in true repentance that was not caused to do so by the work of the Spirit of God.
Right.
But yeah, he will never turn somebody away. And because if you're going to believe in Jesus, that's going to be a repentant faith. Not a faith that says you need to accept me as I am, you need to change your law, you need to change everything else just to fit my experience. Doesn't work that way.
You come as you are, but you are changed.
Yeah. Come as you are, but don't demand that God accept you as you are. Allow him to say, in my law, this is what's right and wrong. And if you're going to be like Jesus, then you're going to need to be changed.
Right. He did say, go and sin no more. Called him out. All right, so I think we got time for one more.
It do be getting a tad bit on the warm side.
Yeah, it's hot up here. Does expressive individualism in its current state have any roots in the Western emphasis on individuality, i.e., rugged individualism?
Well, there were a lot of rugged individuals in the past that still recognized the proper boundaries of God's law on human behavior. So saying that God says this is what men are supposed to do doesn't mean that God creates all men to be identical to one another. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be the big 6'8" burly lumberjack, and then there's going to be the 5'5" accountant. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean the accountant is less of a man. Mm-hmm. It just means his hands are going to be a lot. It's a lot different than So rugged individualism can be put into a lot of different contexts. When it's put into a secular context where you no longer have a God who is our creator, who can establish those parameters, well then, yeah, it can go any direction into insanity. But if it's kept within a context of we are made in the image of God, and that there is a spectrum of how you can fulfill what God wants you to do in many different ways, that's fine. But the issue isn't individualism; it's secularism. Yeah. It's the fact that there is no creator that will define these things.
I think a lot of this has its root in the sexual revolution.
Well, sure.
And I can't help but think of that one, is it Oscar Wilde or Oliver Wilde? Which was a homosexual who was Oscar Wilde. Okay, yeah. Expressive individualism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that's good. Thank you so much for
Well, thank you,
taking the time,
especially
to do
for the
this.
gift of an extra 10 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
My sermon.
And for all those things you said, $20 is fine.
Okay. All right.